So the last story time I did, well, the last story that I did that wasn't the split mini-series was a look at Adrian Newey's big failure, the McLaren MP418. And in that video I made a passing reference to a tyre debacle that is believed to be the reason that Ferrari won the title in 2003, which was probably the closest that Ferrari came to getting beaten in that 2001 to 2004 domination reign. As you might remember, in 2002 Ferrari swept through the Constructors and Drivers' Championships, with Schumacher claiming every record as his own, records that have now, unbelievably, been surpassed. And before people start kicking off, what I mean by this is that in 2004 or so I distinctly remember a lot of people saying that those records would not be beaten. At all. Ever. And, well, they have. So if you were around at that time, you, like me, would have seen that yardstick be laid down and then someone come along and lay a meter stick instead. Hang on, a yard is 36 inches, which is 3 feet, so yeah, a meter is longer than a yard. So to go back to 2003, we need to look at what the cars were like at that point in time, particularly the rubber the cars were using. And they had two brands of tyre to choose from. There was Bridgestone, who had come into Formula 1 in 1997 and initially started out by supplying the back of the grid teams and then taking the front runners on in 1998. So in 1997 they were supplying Stewart, Arrows, Prost, Minardi and Lola. But, the less said about that team the better, even though it was one of the early episodes of this series that I did. Then for 1998, Bridgestone took on McLaren and Benetton, winning their first championship that year with McLaren. And then Goodyear, who supplied the rest of the grid in an almost 50-50 split between the two brands, left Formula 1 at the end of 1998, and Bridgestone was the sole tyre constructor for 1999 and then into 2000, before they were joined in 2001 by Michelin. By 2003, Michelin was supplying literally half of the grid. 5 teams were running French rubber, and 5 were running Japanese rubber. And the 5 Michelin teams were McLaren, Williams, Renault, Toyota, and Jag. But Bridgestone was the superior brand, having won every year there were 2 tyre suppliers with the exception of the 1997 season. Obviously, 2005 and 2006 with Alonso happened, but that hadn't happened yet. And both tyres had their pros and cons. According to research, Michelin's were better in the heat, while Bridgestone's were better in the colder weather, which is sort of proved in the results of the summer races of 2003, because the Michelin tyres did indeed produce better results, because Schumacher could only finish 4th at Silverstone, 7th in Germany, and 8th in Hungary. And if you remember as well as I do, when you've Googled stuff, it was fucking hot that summer. I mean, like, heat waves in the UK, across the rest of Europe, and temperatures were nudging 100 degrees Fahrenheit here in England. Or if you live in Florida, Tuesday. Such was the performance deficit of the Bridgestones in the heat. The top 6 in Germany were all Michelin runners. Schumacher was a lap down in 7th. He beat Button, and if he didn't beat Button, that would have been the top 8, so every points finisher at that time, Michelin runners. But moving on with tyre facts, the Michelins were better qualifying tyres but would suffer from graining during the race. The Michelins were also better in heavy rain conditions, but the Bridgestones were better when it was damp. And this isn't like having a go at anybody, but this is pretty much what happened. Michelin worked with all the teams they supplied. Bridgestone primarily worked with Ferrari because they were Bridgestone's best chance of winning, which is, fair enough. And checking on the results between 2001 and 2006, which is when this Michelin-Bridgestone tyre war happened, the only Bridgestone winner other than Schumacher and Barrichello was Giancarlo Fisichella at the 2003 Brazilian Grand Prix. Mad stat. Absolutely mad stat. And like I said, Ferrari had strolled through 2002, but in 2003 their dominance was in danger of being toppled. The Michelins had caught up and the teams using them had also caught up, so the development war was in full swing. And that was until just before the summer break, when the engineers at Bridgestone noticed that the Michelin tyre sidewalls were showing signs of degradation, which shouldn't really be happening. What had happened was Michelin had interpreted the rulebook in a different manner to Bridgestone. The rules stated that the tread width of the tyres must be 270mm, 27cm, or about, 11 or so inches if you insist on measuring in old money. And this measurement was taken when the tyres were brand new, not after the race. And we've seen this rule come into question before, the 2016 Italian Grand Prix, or the 2015 Italian Grand Prix. I can't remember which one it was, but it was around that time. If you remember, Pete Bonington told Lewis to get a stomp on and to not talk and just do it because of something regarding the tyre pressures. It's a similar sort of thing because those pressures that came into question were taken on the grid when the tyres had been warmed and the blankets had been on and the recon lap to the grid had happened. So Lewis had driven out the pits, driven to the grid, and then they'd taken the tyre pressures. Not when they'd initially bolted those tyres onto Lewis's car. So through this rule interpretation, Michelin was able to develop a tyre that deformed a little bit more than normal. Remember, also in this time period, teams picked a tyre compound, and that was the tyre compound that they had to use for qualifying and the race. Not necessarily the set that they had to carry through qualifying and the race like they did in 2005, but if you used hards for qualifying, you had to use hards for the race. If you used softs, you can use softs, and so on and so on and so on. So Michelin made a tyre that deformed more than probably should have for maximum grip regardless of tyre compound. Bridgestone informed Ferrari of their discovery, and then Ferrari went to the FIA. Then just days after Ferrari spoke with the FIA about this revelation, a memo was issued to the 5 Michelin teams saying that now tyre tread patterns would be checked, as Bridgestone believed that Michelin teams were having more rubber than should be permitted in contact with the road. Bridgestone told The Guardian that it's not been tucked away in our back pocket for a rainy day. The Hungarian Grand Prix was the first race that it became clear to us that there could be a possible Michelin irregularity. But Patrick Head at Williams was convinced that these tyres were kosher. After all, these tyres had been in use since at least the 2001 San Marino Grand Prix, and nothing had been said by the FIA technical delegates in all of this time, before adding that it was all a little bit too convenient that it's brought up now, as Williams was leading the Constructors' Championship and either Montoya or Raikkonen over at McLaren could take the 2003 title. There was a pretty heated press conference at the time too. You had Renault's Flavio Briatore, Williams' Patrick Head, and McLaren's Ron Dennis, representing Michelin, and then Ferrari's Ross Brawn representing Bridgestone, all in this press conference, throwing shade at each other for well over an hour. Imagine the combined size of ego and pride in that room at that time. Sir Patrick said in this press conference, "I really think it would be an extremely sad thing for Formula 1 to be arguing about. These tyres have been plain and visible, fully declared and fully approved and raced for, I'm told, 38 races." Briatore added, "For 2 years we never measured the tyres after the races, so why now?" Dennis, Head and Briatore also agreed with each other that stuff like this would exhaust the viewing public if Formula 1 went through a casino of retrospective rule interpretation. But it did turn out that Michelin was using flexible sidewalls, which contributed to better overall tyre life. However, Michelin and its teams argued that it was a grey area in the rulebook that Bridgestone would have also done if they thought of it. But the FIA thought differently and ordered the tyres be changed in specification for the Italian Grand Prix, which gave them 3 weeks to design and manufacture a new spec of tyres. As the Michelin cars were all designed around the current spec that had been used since 2001, the performance of the McLarens and the Williams declined relative to Ferrari. And it's not the only time we've seen a change in tyre specs send some teams backwards and have some gain. In 2013, Pirelli reverted to 2012 spec tyres following the blowout scene at the 2013 British Grand Prix, which were caused by some cars cutting the kink before the Wellington straight a bit too much, and that just lacerated the sidewall of the tyres. And when that change happened, Sebastian Vettel went on to dominate the rest of the season, but this was all done on safety grounds rather than one brand or team being accused of cheating. As it was, Ferrari then won the next 3 races. Schumacher won at Monza and at Indianapolis, and then Barrichello won in Suzuka. Schumacher would win the title by just 2 points over Raikkonen, while Ferrari won the Constructors by 14 points. But what do you think? Was it a grey area exploited by Michelin, or are they filthy, filthy cheaters? With it being brought up so close to the end of the season with just 3 races left, should it have been, okay, use these tyres until Japan, but after that, you're building new ones? Or was it all just politics? I mean, around that time, the toxicity with the whole political thing was pretty bad. I mean, probably about 2008, 2009, it really stopped, but there was little inklings of it around sort of 2019 with that whole engine deal, but that's something for another day. But like I say, leave all your thoughts down in the comment section. And while scrolling down, if you've enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumb up, and if you're not already, subscribe and get that bell on so you never miss out on a future video. Massive thanks as ever go out to the good folk of Patreon that are on your screen right now, and they continue to support the channel at a more personal level. And if you want to help support me at a more personal level to help with image licensing and other stuff to help these videos be as good as they can be, you can find a link to Patreon down in the description, where there'll also be links to Discord and also to my socials. So with all that said and done, all that's left to say is that I've been Millward, you've been brilliant, have a great day wherever you live in the world, and I'll see you all again soon for another video. Goodbye.